What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. So another one that we definitely wanted to go over for the week of the 4th of November was the latest offering from Ingested, Ashes Lie Still. This again comes out on the 4th of November on Metal Blade Records. This is actually their Metal Blade debut. They were on Unique Leader Records for a while before this, and then I think before that Candlelight. This band formed in 2006 in Manchester, England. This is their 7th album overall, technically, if you are counting the re-recording of The Surreption, titled The Surreption 2, which I didn't see as really necessary, but I mean, it's a thing that they did. And for those that don't know, this is, I guess I would describe it as, or at least I've heard it described as, brutal slamming deathcore. It definitely kind of walks a line between both of those styles. Like, I've heard people in deathcore not call them actually deathcore, call them more brutal death metal, but I've also heard people that listen to more death metal say no, they're a fucking deathcore band, and well, I don't know, they kind of sit somewhere in between and they play extraordinarily heavy fucking music. I've been following this band since their debut album and slowly been watching them sort of evolve over time. We actually went over their last album, Where Only Gods May Tread, and I thought it was a pretty decent offering. I think around the Call the Void EP, they really started to change their sound around a little bit, adding more atmospheric elements, getting away from more of the gore and violence in their lyrics, and kind of just going with, like, I don't know, all-encompassing evil and darkness, and definitely more atmosphere to the music. And I would say this definitely continues that trend, but it also has some good callbacks to their roots as well. Like, there's definitely more straight-up just brutal music on here, which of course there's really no short supply of that in terms of the entire discography of this band. Like, this is a fiercely fucking heavy band, but they've started to employ different dynamics in their sound overall to sort of complement the already firmly entrenched brutality that is, again, all over their discography. Songs like the title track, Sea of Stone, and Tides of Glass both employ more atmospheric elements to complement the just absolutely fucking earth-shaking breakdowns, slams, blast beats, guttural vocals, like all of the intense dynamics that are all over here that you're already used to, but peppering in like more gothic sounding synths, more clean guitar melodies, and even layering the vocals with like clean vocals behind them, which is kind of a thing they've been slowly sort of injecting into their sound overall to add like a little bit of melody. There are melodies scattered throughout this album, mainly in the riff work, but when it comes down to vocals, it's mostly just brutal and in your face, and well, I mean, that's kind of what you want out of Ingested. This is just a flat-out fucking brutal band. I don't expect them to go changing their sound and go full-on, like, super epic and melodic all the time, but a little splash of that every now and then kind of does help this album in terms of, like, giving it a little bit more depth outside of just pummeling the living fuck out of you. Now, this album was mixed and mastered by Christian Donaldson of Cryptopsy, and honestly, I like this mix more than the mix of the last album. That one just sounded pretty much brick-walled. Like, the drums sounded exceedingly loud on that one, and it could actually drown out some of the guitars at times. This, I think everything is, again, very polished, but it's kind of in its right place. The drums, while still loud, don't overpower the guitars. The guitars have a great crunchy tone to them. And the overall heft of this album is definitely felt, and it feels more like this is something you would hear live, too. Like, it is very polished, and I would say maybe overproduced in some ways. But overall, I still feel like this is what you're going to get live. And after seeing these guys live, God, at least 3 times, this is still pretty fucking spot on. And while this is definitely loaded with more atmospheric elements to sort of give this album a little bit more dynamic in terms of like some melodic flavor, this definitely still has that old school brutality on here. And when they decide to just go for the throat with just flat out brutal death metal or brutal deathcore or whatever the fuck you want to call it, it is ridiculously heavy and honestly really fucking good. Songs like You'll Never Learn, Echoes of Hate, and From Hollow Words definitely embody their older sound, which was pretty much kind of latched onto that early aborted sound. It definitely has the sound of those early aborted albums, minus the more like gore grind sort of vibe to them. This pretty much just takes that bass sound in terms of just raw heaviness and then adds more of the deathcore sort of breakdown groove to it, which breakdowns and slams are all over the fucking place on here. But I kind of like that they are a little bit more spaced out this time, and the transitions into them are very smooth. I was kind of worried about going into another deathcore review after going over the last Lorna Shore album. I really wasn't a fan of that, and that was just sort of Not my thing, and kind of obnoxious on a lot of levels. I know there are people out there that are very passionate about this album. I am not one of them. But in terms of like leading into big slams and big heavy deathcore, you know, breakdowns, this album does that much better. The transitions into those breakdowns and slams are way more fluid, and the breakdowns and slams themselves actually have some good riffs in them. It isn't just a standard open chord chug all the time. Now granted, that is a big part of, you know, deathcore breakdowns, metalcore breakdowns, but the little riffy tags at the end, like the little splash of melody or just a slight hook in there that kind of breaks it apart, that makes those breakdowns actually memorable on here. And the fact that the atmospheric elements aren't a constant din in the background. I will say occasionally that the synths on here and the more gothic atmosphere definitely reminds me a lot of Cradle of Filth, and with as loud as they come in, they're about as subtle as Danny Filth's vocals. But when they're in the background, they do add a lot of cool mood to this. Now, this album does feature 2 prominent guest stars on here, and both tracks are very different. On From Hollow Words, we have Sven from Aborted, and yeah, I did lead in with a little bit of a Aborted teaser there. And this song is just a fucking bruiser. It's definitely more death metal centric, like there are some breakdowns on it that have a little bit more of a core vibe, but the overall vibe of it is definitely more along the lines of death metal. And it definitely showcases that, yeah, this band is definitely influenced by Aborted. Sven's vocal prowess is fucking awesome. He adds a lot to the song. It's just an intense bruiser. And then on All I've Lost, we have Matt Heafy of Trivium, just doing vocals. And honestly, I would rather hear him do the guitar parts. Vocally, I think he's just a decent growler, and he is supplying just harsh screams, but this song is kind of all over the place. Like, it wants to be sort of like dark and epic at times, but it never quite reaches those heights. It's a more slow and brooding song. It's kind of just driven by a chunky breakdown. The lead into it, I think, is pretty cool. It actually kind of sounds like Castlevania music. I feel like I've been referencing Castlevania a lot here lately, but it kind of sounds like Castlevania. But overall, it's just sort of an odd song. It doesn't quite gel the way that their song with Sven did. It's just, I don't know, like, feels like there's too many conflicting ideas there, and Heafy kind of feels out of place vocally versus the more brutal vocals that are all over here. And there are some tracks in here I do think are a bit weaker than others. Sea of Stone, I think, is a decent song, but I think the gothic atmosphere kind of just gets to be a little bit too much, and again, pushed way to the front of the mix. It kind of just takes me out of the song. And I have like a bit of an issue with the song with Broken Wings because I feel like the deathcore elements on there are not very strong, but the death metal elements are really strong. So there's part of the song that I really like, namely the big tremolo riffs and the more death metal centric spots, because they just kind of feel more energetic versus the more by the numbers breakdowns that are in that song. Like, I just feel like the deathcore elements don't really shine on there, and you don't get that cool balance. But when you do get that balance, and honestly where everything kind of comes together, is Echoes of Hatred, which I think is one of the heaviest tracks in here. It's one of the fastest tracks in terms of just being more blast beat driven. It does the cool slow down fucking big breakdown at the end. And I feel like just everything was just working on the song. And the riffs on that song, I think, particularly just scream energetic. It's just a fucking bruiser of a song. But the big surprise for me was the last track, or at least the last track in the CD version, Scratch the Vein, which they go almost doom metal on it. Like, it is a more doom metal riff. It's sludgy, it's bendy. It isn't driven by like all the palm muted chugs and syncopated riffs that you generally hear on, well, the rest of the album and most of their entire discography. It's more about this slow, brooding mood and these, again, sludgy, bendy riffs. Reminded me that Kirk Windstein actually popped up on the last album on the song Another Breath, and how well that really worked in that song. I thought that was like a big standout on there. I feel like he should have been on this song too, because it just has that vibe, that sort of somber energy that's all over it. And I just thought this was kind of an interesting way to close this album, or at least on the CD version, because it's not like the most brutal closer. It's more of a somber, dark closer. The clean melodies that bookend the song are very typo negative-ish, and I absolutely love all things typo negative. And I kind of just like the mood and the atmosphere of the song. Like, it's kind of different for them. And again, it definitely expands their sound a little bit more, which definitely seems like a thing that they're trying to do here lately. Now, I did say this is the last track on the CD. If you stream this, there's a bonus remix of the song Rebirth, which I believe was a single like they just put out to promote the fact that they signed with Metal Blade. I listened to the original version a while ago, and it's a solid Ingested song. It's pretty much kind of, you know, what they do. I didn't listen to the remix though, mainly because I have the CD, and I didn't just want to go stream the extra single, especially if it was released a while ago. But overall, I enjoyed this. I actually enjoyed this possibly more than I thought I would, just because, again, like the last Lorna Shore kind of made me go, man, I don't know if I want to do another deathcore review. But I actually really enjoyed this one, and it's cool to see them expand their sound a little bit more and still retain all the brutality they're known for. So overall, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. This was really fucking good. Not without a few hiccups in there and maybe some, like, you know, slight production issues, but overall the production here is really solid. I like the fact that this has stuff that is more akin to their older material, as well as stuff that sort of pushes their sound forward. While it does go to the breakdown well pretty often, but that is kind of, you know, to be expected of deathcore, it does it with some flair, and I like the fact that the transitions are really smooth on here. The atmospheric elements do add a lot. I do think sometimes they come in a little bit loud, and as far as like guest star use, I think they definitely made the most of it with Sven, and at least tried something maybe a bit different with Matt Heafy in there. So while not everything works on this album in terms of stuff that I liked, most of it did, and I think this is just a solid, brutal album. So if you are a longtime fan of Ingested, granted this is not like the first album with its just unbelievable brutality and more brutal death metal sound, but this definitely is close to, like, say, the last couple of albums and the Call of the Void EP, so if you really enjoyed that sound, you'll probably dig this. And if you have yet to jam this band, this wouldn't be a bad place to jump off at. If you already like bands like Aborted, I'm reasonably sure you'll find some cool stuff on here, and, well, Sven's on here, so that should be enough of a lead-in. Either way, I would say definitely check out this band if you're just looking for some insanely brutal fucking music. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below at thrallsmetal.com where there's a link to our Patreon. There's also our store there. We have t-shirts, no extra larges right now. We're going to have to restock on that. We will eventually have some different merch in there. Maybe grenades, I don't know. I feel like they tell me no, but I also feel like I don't listen to them. We also have some audio versions of some of our episodes. We're eventually going to load up some more on there too. And of course, thank you all so much for the support, the love, the comments, the likes, the subscriptions. It's absolutely fucking amazing to be able to do this and just have a lot of fun with it and sort of, I don't know, build something around it. It still fucking blows me away that we got to this point, and it is all due to you guys, so I am always eternally grateful to you guys for helping us get this far, and we will continue to probably tell obnoxious dick jokes, but also review a fuck ton of metal in the future. So now that I've made it only like semi-awkward, I'm just gonna say thank you all once again, and we will catch you later.